Hey folks, welcome back to the DarkHorse Podcast live stream Q&A number 98. We are ready to rock and roll.
All right, let's do it. We're gonna crunch it down. We're gonna start with the question from the Discord this week.
All right.
Shall we? Druids in the Irish Boho Highlands. I think I'm just gonna stop there. I don't know what boho refers to. Haven't been to Ireland, much to my chagrin, but I love the way this starts.
All right.
I'll start over. Druids in the Irish Boho Highlands have long used soil wrapped in cotton cloth placed under a pillow to cure ailments. Researchers found a new bacterial strain named Streptomyces myrophoria, inhibiting 4 of 6 MRSA species in it. Given the parallel to ivermectin, should we focus more research towards soils? Also, maybe not drench our fields in pesticides and herbicides? Certainly the latter.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so it does raise a question about why we might expect, should we expect, and if so, why might we expect soil bacteria to be particularly rich fodder for useful medicines for humans? Or, should we expect that is the case?
Let us tease apart the two things here.
Yeah.
One, I think it's really cool that soil bacteria seem to be doing this, but not so surprising when the target is bacteria themselves.
Bacteria against bacteria.
Right, exactly. Or were it bacteria against fungi or vice versa, right? The natural antibiotic tendencies of these creatures, which are battling everywhere and underground, of course, means that they will produce these chemical warfare agents, which by titrating them, we can use against bacteria that infect us. That's not too surprising. That's sort of classic antibiotic theory. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing about ivermectin is that the bacteria that produces it not only has antibacterial and antiparasite properties, but seemingly antiviral properties, especially against RNA viruses. Yeah. So
incredibly broad spectrum may not be exactly the right word, but
even broader than broad spectrum.
Exactly.
Broad spectrum typically
tends to refer only to bacteria.
Right.
Yeah.
So I still think, what the heck is going on in Japanese soil? I bet you there's an interesting ecological story, and it would be well worth somebody's time to figure out what it is. Never mind the implications for human health. There's going to be some interesting ecological thing going on there and some interesting evolutionary history of it. Mm-hmm. Should we expect that maybe this is a more general property? It could be. I have thrown one long shot possibility into the mix, which is that there might be bacteriophages which interface in this battle of bacteria that would explain why viruses are even in the mix at all. Mm-hmm. But I'd love to know. That said, yeah, of course we should be extremely cautious about these complex, novel, biotically active chemicals that we are drenching everything with in order to increase yields in an agricultural context. It's insane.
That's an easy part of the question.
Right. No matter what else is true, that's a bad idea.
But it does raise, so for instance, when we were doing our graduate work in Central America before I went to Madagascar in largely in Costa Rica and Panama, we got a tour of and became familiar with the workings of INBio, which is Instituto de Biodiversidad, I think, which is basically training Costa Ricans to be what they're calling parataxonomists, to understand, to widely catalog, right? Not necessarily describe the relationships between, which would be the work of phylogenetic systematists, but catalog, the work of taxonomists, the diversity of especially the not so charismatic, not so mega fauna and flora and other life out in the intact nature in Costa Rica in that case. And to what end, if memory serves, INBio was partially funded by the Costa Rican government, but also by Merck, maybe?
I had forgotten this.
I don't remember, but one of the major pharmaceutical companies, and the reason that they were interested in it, and they were supporting laudable so-called basic research, right, in biology, and also those parataxonomists would work with systematists and taxonomists that we knew who were not at the sort of the parataxonomy level to actually describe the diversity that's out there. But why would pharmaceutical companies have had an interest in it? The idea being that, of course, many of the new drugs, the R&D for so many drugs involves actually going to nature and figuring out what that is already being produced might be useful to be synthesized, to be developed, just as ivermectin was back in the 70s from Japanese soil. What I don't remember And it's possible we just, because of our interest and because of the kinds of experiences we had there, maybe this work was going on. But what I don't remember is that NBO had any focus on soil organisms, that it was largely, in fact, insects.
I think at the time it had none. It may have, it may have grown.
But, and, part of it may just be like, we got to start somewhere. And it's easier to interest, for instance, people in cataloging insects than in cataloging soil. But, what might we imagine, if you could choose to direct such a focus at just one kind of either clade or microhabitat within, say, a Costa Rican rainforest, with the potential to not just describe but potentially increase the likelihood of drug discovery, what do you think? Like, where would that be most likely to be fruitful?
Fungi.
Yeah.
I mean, the typical thing, and I have yet to hear a good explanation for this, but plants and fungi are just simply better at fancy chemistry than animals, right? That the diversity of chemicals that one can extract from these things and their biotic interfaces of these chemicals is staggering.
Is it going to be about sort of the equivalent of shelf stability? Animals tend to be mobile, plants and fungi don't tend to be, and motion makes you less shelf stable. And obviously that's the wrong language, but
I would guess it could be that it has to do with mobile organisms being. I would imagine that there's a trade-off relationship potentially, right? And that the idea is a creature that has to be capable of dynamism of the sort that a moving creature has may be limited. In other words, the burden of these chemicals may be great enough that the elaboration of the machinery to produce them doesn't show up.
The prediction of that then might be that animals that are sessile or that have a sessile stage might produce such bioactive chemical compounds at a higher rate than you would expect from their mobile relatives.
Yeah, and actually, though, maybe there's another simpler way to do this. Maybe the point is, if you move, you have one less reason to produce fancy chemicals, right?
If the fancy chemicals are defensive.
Right.
Well, but I think that was an assumption of what you said. No?
Yeah. I don't think it's 100% required, right. But in general, yes.
But there are other reasons to produce fancy chemicals, to use our term of art now. And I guess movement is, among other things, an anti-predator tactic.
Right.
And so if you have that, you don't need defensive chemicals as much, but that doesn't mean that you don't have use for, other reason to have these fancy chemicals.
Right. And actually, so the percentage of animals that are toxic is small. The percentage of plants that are toxic is huge. Yep. They're almost all toxic, right?
At least at some stage of development. Yeah. Or some part of them or some stage of development.
I think it is fair to say almost all plants create secondary compounds. And, empirically speaking, you can just walk into the forest of your choice to take a leaf and touch it to your tongue and find out that, every alarm bell goes off and you're not supposed to be eating that.
Yeah.
You got to be a little careful with things like oleander and things. But in general, you can detect that you're not supposed to be eating most of this stuff because it's produced compounds that would make it very costly to do so. And, there are the exceptional things like the anticaceae, right? These are plants that have housed ants that protect them from herbivores. The ants will sting an herbivore that climbs the tree. They will cut vines. And so they basically have an animal symbiont. And you can take the leaf off an anticaceae and it does not taste super bitter.
Right. But you better not stand touching the anticaceae or else the ants will come out and
sting you.
Hurt you.
Yeah. So
and the plants provide homes and nectar.
Not only nectar.
But homes, like these little, I can't remember if there's a name for them. It's not domiciles. Like they have these hollow thorns.
The hollow thorns,
that the ants actually live in that has a fancy name.
Yeah, the bullthorn acacia. I can't remember what the name of the homes are. And
this is not just one. Like there are a number of these relationships with a number of acacias, I believe.
Yeah, but that one's super fancy.
Yeah.
With the nectaries, the fat bodies, what are they called? Are they called Bayesian bodies, or am I borrowing a term from somewhere else in biology? Anyway,
I mean, yes, you are, but it might actually be used here again.
Little fatty appendages,
Yeah.
little nectaries and homes for the ants. It's an amazing relationship. And these trees are incredibly common in Central America. One finds them all over the place. But so I guess what I would say is, if it is true that being able to move reduces the pressure to generate secondary compounds, maybe increases the cost of
Belgian bodies. Belgian bodies. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Then,
but I haven't found the other thing yet.
The question is, are we overlooking soil because the organisms are less obvious? Obviously, we know that there are bacteria in there,
right?
But it's even less obvious than the hyphae of fungi, and maybe that's a chemical frontier.
Now, this suggests, it's on Pinterest, that they're protein rather than fat rich.
Is that right?
Which is possible. I'm just not finding it.
I believe that. I'm probably just misremembering it.
Yeah. No, a few of these looking at protein rich, but I'm not finding like primary literature to. I know there's a fancy name for the homes too, the hollowed out thorns. Why were we here?
We were here because the Discord wanted us to address the question about the soil placed in the bags under the pillows of people to reduce.
Yes, druids in the is it boho? Some kind of awesome. The Irish boho highlands.
Yeah. There's also a lot of soil eating that people do. Typically, the interpretation has to do with deficiencies, but one can also imagine a chemical defense against hostile bacteria and things.
Interesting. If of course you don't have a breach in your gut blood barrier, you shouldn't be able to get stuff into your bloodstream by eating it, but potentially getting potentially soil bacteria that actually had some use in the gut microbiome.
No, if you had bacteria that you ingested from soil that were producing chemical warfare agents, antibiotics, some of them would cross. I think many of them would cross naturally from the gut into the blood. Oh. I mean, same as taking a penicillin pill, it'll cross.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's true. All right. Let's go to questions that came in this last hour or so. We're going to start with something from our from Kyle. So we know Kyle. And we are not going to be doing this in general, but because we know Kyle, we are going to read this question that came in from him. He says, hello, Dark Horse listeners. COVID has killed what was left of traditional dating, and online dating simply isn't suited to those seeking a long-term relationship. So I am trying something different. If you are or know a single woman who is looking for a quality partner to raise a family with, then I would like to invite you to visit www.dateaguynamed.kyle.com. dateaguynamed.kyle.com. I've laid out the basics of who I am and the kind of person I'm looking for, and I would love to hear from anyone who thinks they might be a match for me. Thanks again. You guys are the best. Hope you have a great weekend.
And I should add, I didn't make it into that, but 20% off site-wide with the code DarkHorse.
What do you think? 20% off?
What?
20% off what?
I don't know, but I'm assuming there's a 20% off code. No, here's what I want to know. All right. What I want to know. So
I love the name of the URL incidentally, Kyle. Data guy named Kyle.
Data guy named Kyle. Yeah, I mean, if you're
not just any guy named Kyle, this Kyle.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, we can't vouch for just guys named Kyle.
No, we can't.
But we can vouch for this one.
I know some good guys named Kyle, including this one.
This one seems to be an excellent guy named Kyle, and he can code.
Yeah.
So
data guy named Kyle who can code. That's not the URL, but yeah.
Maybe next time it'll be that. But yeah, I do think, you and I have been, lots of people have asked us in the aftermath of our book coming out about what we think the implications of the dating train wreck are for future dating. And I would like to see guys like Kyle who recognize that something's off, specifying some set of new rules for interacting in this landscape that would cause people to think, actually, right, he's not just a guy named Kyle who can code, but he's also a guy who has these values and aspires to these objectives.
Yeah. Bullet point, not an asshole.
it's the first bullet. I think a numbered list in which that was number one would be great.
Yeah. Incidentally, actually, this is not about Kyle. Sorry to steal any thunder here, but I think early this week, the Daily Wire is going to be publishing an excerpt from the book and also a short essay that we penned on this topic-ish, right? Which is totally simpatico with stuff in the book, but sort of on the topic broadly of in this day and age, how do you find a life partner?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. I hope it works, Kyle.
Yeah.
Keep
Good
us
luck.
posted. Okay. Two vaccines that China has shared are developed by Sinopharm, labeled CoronaVac. Both are inactivated whole virus vaccines, that is, genetic material destroyed to prevent from replicating inside the human body. Tried and tested technology. If China can, why isn't the U.S. producing a traditional vaccine? Why mRNA instead?
Well, what I would say,
I wish we were.
yeah, is I think based on what we have seen, I would certainly be excited to see a either inactivated or attenuated viral vaccine, which doesn't make those things perfectly safe. But I think the reason to think that they might be more effective and that the immunity would be longer lasting and potentially quite a bit safer are quite real. Yep. I think probably the reason, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm certainly not an expert in this, but my sense was that the RNA platform and the adenovector platform provided a plug-and-play mechanism that greatly accelerated the process of production. Now, I think the concern... I think
that's absolutely right. I mean, I think with regard to the mRNA, it could be done like in a weekend.
Well, right. You could just simply download the sequence and generate it. But the question is, what I think we don't know is what this looks like on the inside of the industry. And the point is, if getting out of the gate first gives you a huge amount of priority with respect to the regulatory apparatus favoring your thing because it gives you a technology you can deploy right away, and that means that anybody who took 6 months or a year longer has a spectacular disadvantage to overcome because the mRNA or the adenovectored vaccines are already so established. Then the point is, well, this is then a perverse incentive to use a technology that may not be the best suited for the job, right? And we really, as always, we have to look at the corruption of our system because let's imagine that, you got to an mRNA or adenovectored vaccine first, and it seemed a good bet to use it. It seemed to be very effective and safe enough based on your testing. You might deploy it, but then as indications emerge that maybe the immunity was very narrow, which of course it would have to be, that it was short-lived, which it didn't have to be, but seems to be the case, and then you would compare it to something else. There should be no priority given to just the earliest creation, right? In fact, you might even expect a trade-off. So, are we getting the best vaccine technology available pointed at this, or are we getting the fastest and the one that could therefore make a splash and, play a role in the political realm?
Right. Well, I mean, and the idea that this should be driven by speed at this point is insane. Early on, having something that had the potential to be developed so fast obviously made sense, but developing that to the exclusion of traditional platforms, traditional techniques never made sense. And we are 19 months in now.
Yeah.
Right? So, we obviously could be. China is, and therefore we could be well on our way to, or already deploying more traditional vaccines as well.
I can say,
and you would certainly reduce vaccine hesitancy by quite a lot if you did so. And if the goal is to vaccinate everyone, that would contribute to that.
There is one thing that I can see as a possible argument against, which is in the case of a inactivated virus, and that is to say a killed virus that has been delivered, you would be delivering spike protein, and that may not, in fact, it is likely not worse than the mRNA version, which is also delivering spike protein, but the way the mRNA version was supposed to work, and actually the adenovector version also,
Yep, J&J.
the spike protein was supposed to anchor in the surface of the cell and therefore not be floating around,
Right.
but it will unavoidably be floating around in an inactivated.
Yeah, so an attenuated viral traditional vaccine that excluded the spike protein.
Then it wouldn't work.
To no degree? Why wouldn't it work to any degree?
Because, well, I can't say it wouldn't work to any degree, but I think to work to a significant degree, it has to be effective at getting into cells. And because the spike protein is key to that, it has to have an effective spike.
I'm not sure about this, but let's move on. I'm just going in the order that they are being fed to me. I have not organized these. Sam Harris says that he cannot disprove you in real time, but seems fine imposing his will and knowledge on us via mandates and censorship. If dialectic isn't an option, then it's predetermined guilt and implied infallibility, no?
Oh, boy. I have to say, I think it just needs to be said. There's one thing in what Sam has been saying that I actually agree with. The one thing I agree with is the frightening prospect of trying to hash these things out in discussion in real time. Mm-hmm. He's not wrong that there's a hazard that comes from trying to do this via a debate. Now, that does not mean there isn't a way to rig a discussion to avoid that hazard so that we could actually hash it out without opening up the discussion to shenanigans, which he fears. Now, he doesn't need to fear that stuff from us.
Right.
We're not going to pull that on him. But I can understand, given where he apparently is mentally on this topic, why he would be cautious. Mm-hmm. That said, yeah, Sam appears to be in conflict with himself. And, well, there's a lot more to be said on that topic, but maybe we should leave it there for now.
Yep. All right. This next one, I at least don't have the relevant information to respond to, but I'll read it. The concept of divine simplicity is a basis of Judaism and most Christianity. As you spoke of the multi-four-part aspect of evolution, I thought it a perfect argument against divine simplicity. Thoughts?
I'm not sure what that's a reference to.
Right. I don't know either. The sort of the four things that they might be referring to might be the mechanisms of microevolution.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that come in fours.
Yeah, and then also the four-part
test of adaptation.
Four-part test of adaptation, the genetic, epigenetic, behavioral, and symbolic modes of inheritance that Jablonka and Lamb write about in their book. So I'm not being familiar with the concept of divine simplicity. I just think we have no way we could sort of flail about, but there's lots of fours.
Yep.
You heard it here first. Lots of things come in fours. And 3s, 5s, 2s, 6s. Yeah.
I think quite accidentally, for no reason whatsoever, there are several things that we used in teaching that there were 4 of, which was a source of confusion because people sometimes couldn't keep the list straight.
That's interesting. I don't remember this. So you're talking about the 4-part test of adaptation, 4 mechanisms of microevolution. That Jablonka and Lamb book is awesome, but I don't think either of us taught with it so much that would have come up a lot.
Yeah. 4 characteristics that cause a pattern to become common.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think it's just a coincidence, frankly. I
yes, you would, wouldn't you?
A single reason beyond coincidence for it.
Will and how might nature respond to our potential lab leak? I guess I don't know what is meant by nature here. If we're talking about sort of wild nature or we are all part of nature. So do you want to take a crack at what might be meant here? There's a lot of things it could mean.
We made an argument early on. I still think it's important. And actually it's a counter argument to one of the things that Sam has recently said. Mm-hmm. He said he was quiet about the lab leak because what difference would it make? And
we've argued often why it would make a difference.
Right. One reason is because if you've effectively used gain of function, if you've used serial passaging, for example, to draw a virus in a direction that it had not already evolved, you've effectively put tension on a rubber band, and you should expect that when it encounters the world of phenomena that it will be pulled in the other direction, so you could predict where it was going to go. Now, That said, so for example, were it the case that a serial passage experiment had resulted in it surrendering the capacity to transmit outside because the serial passaging experiment took place inside, and it got some characteristic for foregoing that tension, then you would expect it to return to the ability to transmit outside, right? That's one example of a way in which an experiment could have pulled it one way, and then we would expect it to naturally fall back the other way, just the same way that if you...
I could see the opposite argument, though. I mean, in this case, I guess I had not before heard you describe this as like a rubber band, the selective force. The selective force could also be accelerating in some directions such that the virus now has a tendency to seek out more change in the same direction.
Well, you could do that too. You could effectively solve a problem that the virus can't solve in nature. And in fact, we did that. If this is a lab leak, then what we did...
So that feels like the more obvious way that we exerted selective pressure if we use gain of function to create this virus.
Yeah, but if you think about it like... The argument I made in my dissertation about the tension between dispersal and competitive strength, and that effectively
in a maple tree.
In things generally. So if you look at Hawaii,
right, that's what I'm saying. Like in anything, not specifically viruses, not to humans, to anything.
What should you expect to be to characterize the creatures of Hawaii? They're all going to be excellent dispersers, at least the native ones, right? What does that mean about their competitive strength? They'll be feeble, because the point is there's a trade-off between those for reasons I make an argument for, but never mind. So the point is you would expect...
They're good at getting to places, having gotten there. Everything else is just as good at getting places and has not been able to put resources to competitive strength.
Right.
Yeah.
So they will have borrowed to get dispersal, they will have borrowed from competitive strength, and they will have reduced selection for competitive strength in a low diversity environment, which is a natural consequence of it being a remote island. Right. That said, if you solve a dispersal problem, if you take a mongoose to Hawaii, it's going to have a field day because it's a very strong competitor, right? And lots of things. So Hawaii is very vulnerable, unlike a mainland tropical habitat. Hawaii is very vulnerable to invasion because it has all these feeble competitors. Why are they feeble? Yeah. Because they're excellent dispersers.
Yeah, if you overcome the dispersal
barrier,
then of course they're going to win.
Right. So the implication is that we effectively solved, if this was a gain of function escapee, we effectively solved a dispersal problem for the virus, so it didn't have to solve it. We gave it the keys to the human kingdom, and then having gotten in there, you would expect it to find its own equilibrium,
or potentially the keys to the ACE2 kingdom.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
That said, so we solved the dispersal problem. You would expect it to naturalize into the human population, and then we have interfered with a novel kind of vaccine that is almost cartoonishly narrow in its evolutionary scope, and therefore we are now pushing the virus around.
We have used the vaccine to interfere with. Not we have interfered with the vaccine.
Right. No, we have interfered with the evolution of the virus after solving a dispersal problem. Assuming this was a lab leak, which is an assumption, but a more and more likely one, then we are now pushing it around evolutionarily. We're pushing the virus around evolutionarily, so it won't find an equilibrium. It will move in response to our evolutionary pressure that we are exerting.
Yep. Speaking of which, there's another question here. Trusting if SARS-CoV-2 makes the evolutionary leap to transmit outdoors, you will tell us. Yes, and what we've said is, although we're not, especially in our main podcast, we're spending a lot more time talking about the broader ideas of the book rather than this particular moment in time that we find ourselves in with regard to COVID stuff. We have said that if things arise that run counter to what we have said publicly, we will absolutely come back with that. And I still have not seen. So you have said that there are a couple of super spreader events that seem to have been at outdoor events, but it is of course possible that the way that they were effectively super spreader events was in like bathrooms.
Right.
And and that is the only, and I don't actually even know, all I know, my entire knowledge of this is from you. I have seen nothing, and it's not for lack of, swimming in this literature a fair bit, to suggest that there has been anything like a change in terms of transmissibility, even in the Delta variant.
Well,
regard to outdoors versus indoors.
Yeah. So I believe we are beginning to see that. I don't think it's a strong pattern yet, but what I've seen is not easily dismissed as it was a bathroom or something like that. That remains a possibility, but in one of these cases, it doesn't look likely. But I would also point out it could be a natural consequence of the increased transmissibility, right? That the idea is, if you take the model that we were developing a year ago, right, where basically you've got a space, it has a volume, it saturates at some rate. You are not likely to be infected if you're healthy and you're in the space for a short period of time. But if it's saturated, you'll get it. Right. And then the point is,
you need 100 units with the original variant, and now you need 50.
Right.
Yeah.
So the point is, can you conceive of an outdoor space that saturates like an indoor space? Maybe not with the original variant, and maybe you can with something that's much more transmissible.
Yep.
So, something like that. That's how my model is cautiously changing.
No, that makes some sense. Yep. How do we stop the dangerous and growing vaccinated versus unvaxxed false narrative?
Oh boy, how do we end up here? But look, there are ways, but it's going to involve people not accepting these overly simplistic perspectives.
Yeah, right. And how do we do that? I don't know.
But
it really is like if the basis for your confidence that you're on the right side here is a conclusion that you're not being allowed to see the analysis that was used to come to the conclusion, you should be questioning that. You should look for something that actually has an analysis that's visible, whether or not you're interested in or deem yourself capable of interpreting that analysis.
I think this is also, we mentioned in the initial podcast today, the danger of verificationism. And I think the problem is, if you're a verificationist, and we are all born verificationists, right? You have to get over it. But if you're still a verificationist and you go looking for evidence of that simple story, you'll find it, right? If you go looking for evidence that contradicts that story, you will find that overwhelmingly as well. And so I think the point is, look, the simple stuff does not fit with the actual evidence or the logic, right? And so how do we get on the same page? We recognize that, somebody engaged in a propaganda campaign under the heading of pandemic of the unvaccinated, right? That's how the demonization began, but that doesn't even make any sense, right? Logically, it doesn't. That doesn't make it a pandemic of the vaccinated, but it means that there is a role played by the vaccinated, which is required for us to have ended up where we did. And, at the point you see that, and at the point you see that there are early treatments which vaccinated people need access to because breakthrough cases are real and common, right? So the point is, once you see those two things, it isn't a pandemic of the unvaccinated, and early treatment is necessary, vaccinated or not, right? Once you see those two things, then the point is, we're not two camps. Let's get it straight. Let's figure out which early treatments work, and let's figure out what to do about our very remarkable but not effective vaccines.
Related-ish. I just read a recent WAPO opinion, quote, "Of course hospitals in crisis mode should consider vaccination status," by Tennille R. Brown. Is this how Nazi Germany started? Justifying the dehumanization of other humans. What are your thoughts?
Could you read the beginning of that question again?
I just read a recent WAPO opinion, the title of which I believe is, "Of course hospitals in crisis mode should consider vaccination status."
Okay. And then the question, sorry, now I've missed the second part.
Is this how Nazi Germany started? By justifying the dehumanization of other humans?
It is and it isn't. I think the problem is there is a scenario in which you would have very good reason to consider something like vaccination status. And what you would do about it is not what's being done. This is a nonsense story that we're being given. But
frankly, with different vaccines and with a different disease.
Right. That's the point, is you don't want to say, anytime anybody says vaccination status is a relevant medical parameter, and
of course there are conditions under which vaccination status will be irrelevant medical parameter.
But it's, let's put it this way. Years ago, I proposed a solution to the problem of not enough organs for people who need a transplant. Mm-hmm. Right? The idea was, if you're an organ donor, you should get priority on organs if you need one, right? You can solve the problem in one fell swoop, right? That's not a matter of dehumanizing anybody. It's a matter of aligning incentives. And one can imagine a scenario that I do not believe we live in, but one can imagine a scenario in which civilization has done its part. It's generated excellent vaccines, and it needs a certain level of compliance, which it's not getting for reasons that don't add up. And it does some prioritization in order to align incentives so that we get where we're going. We are so far from that story. That's the problem.
Given the particular tools that we are being told that we must use.
Right.
Yeah.
We are being directed to tools. We are being forbidden other tools. We are being demonized for political reasons. And all of those things suggest, this is analogous to what happens when one population is preparing to decimate another. It involves dehumanization, but it doesn't mean that there's not a medical story that could contain elements of this.
Absolutely. Very good. I'm having a hard time parsing this, but you may be able to make sense of it. The problem with the example of contraception from the Amazon review is the question, what if everyone did it? In this case, to live child-free. The reasonable scientific, philosophical, and religious conclusion is no.
Oh, I've got it.
So I just can't track exactly what's being said here.
So in the Amazon review, which
that 2-star review that we talked about?
The 2-star review, which we said was obviously critical, and we believe it to be wrong, but it is a contribution.
But it's
careful, a useful. Yep. It is intended to be good critique, and it is the basis for a very important conversation.
Absolutely.
Okay. In the second half of that review, the reviewer talks about the fact that our model that we put forward, effectively, where our cultural perspective is obligated to serve the genes. We are very careful in the book to explain that as you get towards modernity, you cannot make the assumption that our cultural beliefs, even expensive ones, are serving the genome, because these things haven't passed the test of time. So in order to know that these things are adaptive, they have to be old enough to see whether or not those who hold them out can beat those who don't. The problem is, in fact, so I kind of wanted the guy who wrote that review, I wanted to be in a class where he submitted that as a paper.
Sure.
Right? And it would be like, excellent paper. Here are the 6 ways that you're wrong. Now,
let's go back and forth on it.
Right.
Yeah.
The thing that's wrong here is that he's identified a perfect example of hypernovelty and the arbitrary distribution of adaptiveness and changeableness of various things. So we have made the argument that it is selection wants you to produce offspring that carry your genes to get your genes into the future. We have a really easy time unhooking our evolutionary drive to have babies because birth control allows us to decouple sex from reproduction. We have a very difficult time controlling the impulse to have sex. And the point is, we are lucky that selection did not make the production of babies pleasurable, that it made sex pleasurable, because if it made the production of babies pleasurable, it would be hopeless to control.
Drowning in babies.
We'd be drowning in babies, right. So the point is, this is a great example of a hyper-novel, no simple answer, arbitrary mapping of flexibility, because some of it's housed in the genetic layer and some of it's housed in the cultural layer. It's the perfect example. He's gone one step shy of the actual conclusion.
Which, I mean, it also reveals this idea that I don't think actually ends up showing up in the book at all. But we've said, it could have just about as well been the title of the book, obvious in retrospect.
Yeah.
But many of the evolutionary ideas that actually do seem obvious in retrospect take some time thinking on them, going back and forth, engaging with them, and And they won't be obvious in retrospect until Zach decides to put the camera back on the two of us.
Right, because there are two of us here, and you were the one talking, and
Yes.
I was the one listening, which,
But
you know.
as it turns out, all I had to do was say his name, and he was triggered to put the camera back on both of us.
Yep, that was cool.
So anyway, the obvious in retrospect point might be seen as too glib and obviously false, because we have also talked about, okay, this person appears to be making, for instance, not necessarily this guy, but a number of people will be appearing to engage with the ideas carefully, but not be quite getting it. And some of the obvious in retrospect points actually take some time. You can't just hear them once or read them once and get them. They actually take some going back and forth so you can figure out how this model needs to be applied.
Yeah, it's a question of the number of things that are wrong with the model you bring to your exposure. And so, my favorite example of obvious in retrospect is The Origin of Species. And the point is, it took decades and a full book, and still, it didn't convince people right away.
Yeah.
But, T.H. Huxley's response, I think, was something famously like, why didn't I think of that? Right? The point is, if you were steeped enough in this kind of stuff, it was instantly obvious, right? And if you weren't, it still may not be obvious to you if you had enough steps of your model that were different.
And just apropos nothing really, T.H. Huxley's relationship to Aldous Huxley was like grandfather,
no, I think
uncle,
cousin,
18th removed or something.
Yeah,
now. Okay.
something.
Yeah. Please consider inviting Dr. Paul Saladino on the podcast. Would be fascinating to hear you discuss diet and evolution with him. Are you familiar with him?
Mm-mm.
I am not. Paul?
Although the last time I said I wasn't familiar with somebody, it turned out I was very much familiar with him.
Yes, indeed.
Yes. Neil Oliver.
Neil Oliver, indeed. Yes. Yep. We are, it turns out, both just had forgotten the name. Yeah,
yep.
Terrific. But so maybe that will prove to be true here. I apologize if so. PSA for those looking for talented anti-woke musical artists. Tom McDonald is the GOAT. Might be an interesting podcast guest. Hashtag Clown World.
Must be his first album.
I'm 30 and a fit retired medic, on verge of saying fuck it and old school inoculating myself in isolation before a more lethal variant emerges. Please steel man the case for why I'm retarded. This is from someone called The Right to Bear Markets. Alternately, The Right to Bear Markets.
So the person is talking about contracting COVID to generate immunity. That's what they're arguing for.
Yeah, and it took me a couple of reads to figure out that's what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Steelman the case for why you're retarded.
Here's why you're. I can easily steelman the case for you being retarded. You're retarded because.
He asked
wow,
for it.
He asked for it. No, that's not a term I use, and it's not a term I'm going to use here.
Yeah.
Here's the error that you're making.
Mm-hmm.
You are making an error because we cannot rule out certain downstream consequences of COVID disease itself. Among them are the possibility that it hides in some tissue in which your immune system cannot clear it, and therefore people who have had it still have it, and we don't know that. That is a possibility. I don't think it's likely, but it's possible. It is also possible that the consequence of having COVID, the destruction that it does to the body, will have some implication down the road that we cannot see. And so, although you are right that future variants are a frightening prospect because we don't know what their nature will be, and therefore you're comparing current COVID horror to unknown magnitude future COVID horror, it is not a simple matter of, well, let's deal with this and be done with it, because you don't really know that you can be done with it.
You don't know that you can be done with it. So far, the variants seem to be more transmissible, not more deadly. But of course, that is not a pattern that is under any obligation to stay the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the steelman. It doesn't necessarily, it is what it is. It is what you asked for, except for that term, which I should not have allowed myself to fall into
Did higher calorie intake help us evolve advanced brains? Could modern calorie-dense diets allow us to become even more intelligent? One of the leading hypotheses, one of the hypotheses that we take seriously in the book about some of the move towards higher cognitive capacity in humans is about fire and then the cooking of food. The cooking of food, which allows us to get more nutrient load out of every bit of food that we eat, and thus it gives us more time also. So cooking of food gets us to more nutrient load, more nutrients out of our food, and also spend less time actually eating it. And I think this is Richard Wrangham, important, amazing primatologist who has written many papers on this, but also the book called Catching Fire? Something. No, I can't remember. It's anyway. I'll look it up after when you're talking because it's in here as well. Argues that I think some of his research has shown that eating an entirely raw diet that is somewhat heavy in meat, a person would be chewing for like 5 hours a day. I think that's the number that he comes up with, him and the researchers that he's working with on that paper, which would have obviously gotten in the way of things like talking and sharing ideas and engaging with one another in anything besides mastication. To the degree that we were able to get more out of our food, that may well have been part of what increased cognitive capacity. But the idea that it's simply that we need more food and that increases brain size, there are limits on brain size that have to do with when in your development you're born and to what degree you can continue to alter women's hips compared to men's hips and still have us be basically similar enough that we can engage with one another as the same species, that we're already sort of at the limit of width of female hips with regard to stability issues. So there are things restricting the upper bound of brain size, at least where we're born, and we're already born so helpless that being born even more helpless and thus with a smaller brain earlier in development would put us at even greater risk.
All right. So cooking food liberates more nutrition. It reduces the amount of time necessary to process it, and it makes food more tastier, which is good.
More tastier. Yes.
What I would add to your
Catching Fire. Cooking
Fire.
As Human.
Yep.
Wrangham, 2009. Yep.
All right. So what I would add, and I agree with your analysis as far as it went, the limits may not be about, in fact, we have too much food. We know that.
Right. Totally.
So food is not the limiting factor.
And we're
here.
not getting smarter.
No, we're not getting smarter.
We do not appear to be getting smarter.
Right. Here's the other thing, though. In order to get this, if it was true that our cognitive capacity was food limited, and then we had more food, and for some reason the limits that you, Heather, point to were not driving, it would have to be the case that the extra cognitive capacity resulted in more offspring, which is a very unlikely connection in modern times, right?
Yeah.
No, I mean it simply is, right? Like if you just imagine for a moment a world in which we are limited by calories in terms of our cognitive capacity, and then suddenly you remove the limit of calories, that does not result, in people outwitting each other to reproductive ends, right? It results in people hanging out in salons and talking about interesting patterns, but I don't know that results in babies.
Not usually. No. All right. I'm not familiar enough with this to respond, but I'll read the question. The UK vaccine surveillance reports show that for many ages, that is many ages of people, vaccinated have higher per capita infections than unvaccinated. What are your thoughts?
I wish the data was better, but yes, one hears a lot about anomalous patterns that I have the sense we are not following up on, and may or may not imply things that we should know.
Yeah, I agree. Could taking neurogenic compounds like lion's mane increase the risk of neuronal cancer?
Neuronal cancer is very rare.
Yeah,
in
I like
general,
this question for this reason.
brain tumors are the result of auxiliary cells associated. They are present in the brain, but they're not neurons themselves. And the reason for this is almost certainly...
Is it glial cells or is it...
Yeah, I think I think there are several different kinds.
Yeah.
But yeah, supportive cells are the ones that create tumors. The reason for this is probably that the neurons do not do their neuronal magic by making more neurons in general. They make their magic by making more dendritic connections. And so the point is, to the extent that a tumor is a cell producing too many daughter cells or dividing too frequently, it is not the division of neurons that is the way the brain works. So
it does happen, but it's rare. It's more about synaptic connections.
Yeah, it's not zero, but it's not a real productive tissue.
It's not a growth industry.
It's not
as an adult.
Right. It's not. Yeah. Although you could get an analog of cancer in which you got the proliferation of dendrites beyond what would be useful, and I'm going to propose the name for the malady would be galaxy brain.
Brought on perhaps by lion's mane. Too much lion's
could be
mane consumption.
Yeah, I had completely forgotten the lion's mane connection. But yes, you could get a case of galaxy brain from lion's mane, so
watch
beware.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should put that disclaimer at the beginning of those ads.
We need to know the Latin for
galaxy.
Fungivore, emptor. No, caveat fungivore. Something like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I have some glimmer of recognition about this, but I can't quite remember. I'll bet you will, and you will still deflect. That's my prediction. Bret, as Heather has asked, what is the joke? The one your dad told. So you do. You do remember.
Oh, I know the joke.
Okay.
Yeah. Wow.
I
wish I could.
I'm just reading questions.
Here's the thing: I'm concerned if I tell this joke, even as a historical artifact, that people might throw a rope on me and try to tear me down like some kind of statue to a past era. Right? I just
yes, you're sort of elk-like in your
exactly.
seriousness, impact.
Yeah, we really need to get back to a world where I can tell that joke, because it's really is an evolutionarily very insightful joke, if offensive.
How about this? Can we offer Lanning Psyche, if that is in fact how you pronounce your name here, that off air, since as I predicted, he's not going to do it, that you will tell me and our sons this joke. I'm sure I've heard it before, but I don't know what you're talking about yet. And that we will work with you to figure out if there is a way to do this without being treated like a common elk statue.
You're going to help me figure I just think that this
no promises. Look, I'm not saying it's possible, but you will.
They have been relentless in trying to cancel me.
The
big
cancelers.
They have changed identities, and all sorts of people who were not initially in favor of the cancellation at all have now switched teams and are now trying to cancel me.
You may have noticed that I have in fact noticed.
Yes, you've noticed.
Yes,
so, I just wonder if this joke is the thing that's going to get me canceled, and it's going to cause near universal agreement in the fact that I am not to be tolerated in polite society.
Have some stickiness on that New York Times bestseller list before maybe going into this territory.
I would like a stunt double to tell this joke so that he can be canceled, if not killed, and I can go on living a life that I'm quite enjoying.
You're not advocating for the killing of your stunt double.
No. I mean, I guess it's cheaper unless he's paid in advance, but...
So this is okay, but this joke isn't? Really? How could this joke be?
That's a great joke, actually, but
you're not helping yourself.
No, I'm not. I'm enjoying life too much to exit on this joke.
I'm glad to hear it.
Yes.
So at the point that you get to the dying in time stage, as Roger Scruton wrote before he himself died, what seemed to all of us an untimely death, maybe then you will share the joke.
A deathbed confession joke. Yeah, sure. No, that makes good sense.
Before.
If were the world to right itself and allow for, jokes at the edge of tolerableness, sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Where are we at, Zach? 55 minutes. All right. Please acknowledge Stanislav Petrov Day tomorrow. Lieutenant Colonel in the Soviet Air Defense, credited with preventing nuclear war on September 26th, 1983.
Yeah, it's the...
You recognize his name. I did not recognize his name, but I recognize the date.
Yep. The dude refused to launch the nukes, which, frankly, is the duty of every... I think it is actually a natural extension of the Nuremberg trials, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is the one holiday that
When not
every
to follow
Earthling...
orders.
Yeah, you don't follow immoral orders. Yes, we are learning, actually, that...
Stanislav Petrov Day.
There is a arms race afoot, and those who wish to give immoral orders are creating conditions in which those who will resist moral orders cannot...
Immoral orders.
Immoral order, yeah. Resisting moral orders, that's not a thing.
Well, it is, but it shouldn't be.
No.
Yeah.
Those who are likely to resist immoral orders are being driven crazy and therefore leaving their posts, which is going to leave a population of order followers who don't get it.
From law enforcement to medical care providers.
Yes, I think it is a general next phase in the arms race. But yes, I have heard it from law enforcement, and it is absolutely frightening, especially in light of what is taking place in Australia.
Yep. So Stanislav Petrov Day tomorrow. Excellent. Excuse me. I like your idea of fourth frontier. Others think that the next frontier is body-mind tech merge. IOB. What's IOB stand for, Zach? Okay. And then there's a link to something...
Internet of Brains.
Maybe. There's a URL, siliconicarus.org, transhumanism, thoughts. We've been hearing more and more of this. I think Joe Rogan brought it up.
Yep.
I think Brian King brought it up. A number of people feel like this is where we're going. They don't want us to be going there, but it's inevitable.
Well, okay. First off, we got to relax.
Do we?
Yeah.
Really?
A little.
This doesn't sound like you.
We got to relax, get our head in the game, and then leave nothing on the table. Leave it all on the field. I don't know. No, we don't need to relax. But we need to relax about the idea of the tech merge because it's too late. It's already happened.
Okay. So,
okay.
Yeah.
The thing is, you have already merged, but because the interface isn't wires, for example, it is somewhat invisible to us. Now that said,
but I found myself doing this today, just like out in nature, and just like I'm just gonna look at this one.
Right. Oh yeah, they got you.
Terrible. Awful.
Yeah,
Completely awful.
Absolutely crazy. But anyway, I think the point is, look, it's happened. We can see that the consequences are not entirely horrible, but a lot of them are really catastrophic. That it's disrupting
and some
all
of
sorts
them
of normalcy.
Will be irreversible.
Right. Well, hence what we do argue in the book, which is that you ought...
In part, put your phone down. Really, put it down.
Well, put your phone down, but, look, if you're going to make a transition about which you know very little about the consequences, then you better be prepared to unmake that transition. And the way we adopted the smartphone, what seems like forever ago but wasn't, I mean, it really wasn't.
It really wasn't.
It really wasn't.
Yeah.
The point is, you completely changed how the species works.
Yeah.
And not all to the good. In fact, it may be that the species is incapable now of navigating because we are so easily divided from each other over things that should absolutely be galvanizing us, right? So if that's true, if a technology can sweep to fixation, it's not quite fixation. Glenn Beck does not have a phone, but everybody else does.
Well, no, everybody else, almost everybody else with the means, which means, some people in the non-weird world have it, but many people don't. And some number of people in the weird world just don't have the means for it either.
Well, I'm being glib, of course, but my sense is that yes, there are people who don't have a smartphone in the US. Very few.
Right.
is my impression.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's universal in the homeless population, but
exactly what I was gonna
somehow,
say.
I don't know
Yes.
how, I mean, maybe they're burner phones or, I mean, they're prepaid or whatever, but
is that a thing in smartphone land? I don't know, but yes, you and I have.
yes, it is.
So Zach says yes, burner prepaid smartphones, but yes, even among the homeless who have almost nothing, there are people with smartphones.
Right. So anyway, and you know, also as you and I have encountered, lots of people haven't. In fact, there are lots of places in the world where the landline network never got up and running, and so cell phones.
But you know, and then this is a little different though, and we haven't been back, for instance, to Madagascar since the late 90s.
Yeah.
By the mid 90s in Madagascar, we didn't have cell phones until 2003, 4, something like that. Cell phones, even we didn't.
Mm-hmm.
We personally didn't. Almost all of our colleagues did, but we were like, nah, not sure. Basically, at the point that I was late stage pregnancy with Zach, it's like, okay, we gotta get phones. But mid late 90s, when increasingly people were getting cell phones, but by no means was it universal in the US, say. In Madagascar, many people had cell phones,
Yep.
but smartphones didn't exist, and they were cheap flip phones. And I have no idea, not having been back to Madagascar since '99, what the distribution of flip phones versus smartphones looks like. What we were seeing was, because it is such an impoverished country with so little ability to put in infrastructure, landlines just never went in.
Yeah.
So there are a couple places, I imagine Tana has some landlines and such, and some of the bigger cities, but throughout most of the country, there's no capacity.
Well,
for
the cell phone
landlines.
was just superior because you could actually call from places and reach people and other things that you might want to do.
Oh my God.
With a phone.
Trying to make a landline call to our parents at some point, like 93 or something. And I don't know, it took 3 hours and we still were able to be like, we're alive. Bye.
Right. We still don't know whether they thought that was a good or a bad thing.
The parents on the other end?
The parents, they probably thought it was a good thing.
That we were alive?
Yeah.
Probably.
I don't remember the nature of the question, but I know that. Yeah, the Borg and whether or not
transhumanism. Yeah.
Resistance.
Did you figure out what IOB means?
It may mean it's on bitch, but I don't know.
So it's on what? It's on pitch.
No, it's going to be Internet of something.
I don't think so.
Brains.
I think it would have been a little O then.
It would have been a little O.
It's
wasn't
not
a little
here. No.
But that's all the Urban Dictionary gave me, really.
Okay. It's on, bitch.
It's on, bitch.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah. Okay.
So we do these things. It's increasingly catastrophic. We need to stop doing these things. And not doing these things means reversibility.
Yeah, reversibility. Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Chris Martenson interviewed David Icke. I don't know how his name is pronounced. Time to digest that COVID response is beyond incompetence and greed, money greed. Psychopathy at the top explains a lot. I have not seen that interview. I'd be interested. Chris Martenson is fabulous.
Yep.
I don't know anything about it. Okay. Are you actually going to make an epigenetically how dare you shirt? Please do. I like it. I guess it's just such an inside joke that people would have to be willing to wear an inside joke, because for the most part, people would be like, what?
It's a conversation starter.
It is. That's one of the ways to find your life partner.
To find your life partner.
Yeah.
It's somebody who's interested what that could possibly mean. And it also could be a fire starter if it was cold or something.
Oh, it's like the towel in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So many reasons to carry to wear an epigenetically how dare you shirt. You can soak it in liquid nutrients and then suck on it when you're hungry.
Right. Or if it's cold, you could start a fire with it, which might attract somebody who knows how to solve the problem. So it can solve any problem potentially.
The problem now being how to put out a fire made by your shirt. What?
Whatever problem you have.
I see. Okay. We're not even high, guys. No. We're not. Are our house pets suffering the effects of modernity in a manner similar to us? To some degree, yeah. Diet, oh my God, we're completely messing up them. We're completely messing up our animals with the food we give them. Restricting them to activity at only certain prescribed moments of the day. Yeah.
Well, I would point to one thing in particular.
Okay.
The degree to which pets are now suffering sensitivities to food.
I did say diet.
I know, but diet, the obvious one is, hey, everybody's pets are fat, right?
Mm.
Yep, that's bad. But the degree to which pets are reacting, presumably allergically to their food, is alerting us to something. The same way humans are becoming allergic to their food, something is doing that. And to the extent that we can't say exactly what it is, that is alarming.
Yeah. There was no, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say in the 1930s, no vets were saying you're going to need to put your cat or your dog on an elimination diet.
Right.
Elimination diets now for humans and our domesticates are not just all the rage, but they actually are necessary in many of our cases to figure out what it is that is now poisoning us, even though it's not a poison universally across the species.
Did you hear the one about the chameleon who had to start eating fireflies?
No.
They put him on an illumination diet.
Oh. Okay.
I feel good about it, actually.
Yeah, you do. My objection is only chameleon. It didn't have to be a chameleon.
Yeah,
right?
It did.
Why?
Oh, so much more vivid. What else would it have been?
So for me, maybe most people don't do this, but for me, when you say chameleon, I imagine like a Furcifer pardalis or something, and like it's one that has a really strong ability to change colors. And so at the point that it's eaten the fireflies, I don't actually get the illumination. I'm just sort of seeing like it's slightly brighter red, and maybe that's just me.
Yeah, I think that's okay. I think that's just you. The importance of the joke was that it vividly evoked a chameleon shooting its tongue out and grabbing a firefly, which is already kind of cool, right?
That would
Most
be
jokes
cool.
don't have that.
Yeah, I didn't. I think it needs another half sentence of setup to get the capture.
All right. I don't know what that half sentence would be, but
I don't either.
Yeah.
I don't either. Why, when out walking, do I feel compelled to walk in step with the rhythm of music?
Well, there are a couple answers to that question. These are all half-baked, but I have a feeling there's something useful in here.
Mm-hmm.
One, there is some kind of a timekeeping something or other in our neurological structure. Certain drugs bring it out. You can reveal it.
What do you say more about that?
All I can say is, empirically speaking, certain drugs bring out some sort of kind of a metronome thing.
Oh, okay. You're not
right.
Okay.
Likewise, there are lots of processes in the body that seem to be synchronized temporally, and it would not be surprising if a feat as remarkable as walking involved some of these processes, and that these processes were also involved in music.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in other words, like,
Yeah.
Think about it this way.
Well, but I mean, also music is synchronizing. It's synchronizing of brains, and it may be synchronizing of bodies as well. We can all come up with examples of moments in which music has been intentionally synchronizing.
Right.
You know, among marching armies or among Gandhi dancers, right? Where you want to be in sync and you use music, or among rowers,
Sure.
right? So it doesn't feel like synchronicity when there's only one of you, but it could be appealing to that same circuit.
I agree, but I was...
Sorry.
No. I mean, somewhere in this neighborhood is going to be something, but there was one other
I robbed you of it.
thought. You did.
I'm sorry.
There was something, and it was kind of cool. I'm trying to think, what the hell was it?
Now I owe.
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you know what it was, Zach, that your dad was going to say?
I have some sense, but I'm going to figure it out.
Yeah, I'll get back there. All right.
Okay, we're going to go
We'll
on.
move on. I'll get back.
Excellent. So we'll stop here soon. What's the status of Heather's novel? Thoughts on traditional publishing versus self-publication? We've been our editor was asking us what we're going to do next, what books we want to write next, and I do want to get back to the science fiction novel, of which I have a completed second draft, but I literally have not looked at since probably early 2018 at this point. And I just haven't at this point. I don't think it'll be the next one. Although there are certainly people we've talked to, Tom Bilyeu, Jordan Hall, our friend, who definitely want that to be top of the list. So, so yeah, I do want to get back to it. Traditional publishing versus self-publishing. I published a book 19 years ago. I didn't publish it. I had a big publisher who published my first book, but I was not known in any way at that point. I was lucky enough to get this big publisher because I won this. You knew me, but I'd won this writing prize from the Atlantic Monthly, which allowed me to get this big publisher. But I was unknown, and I was writing a book that was going to have somewhat limited appeal, and so there was no push. Like, I felt well treated by my editor for sure, but and self-publishing wasn't a respected thing at that point, so it wasn't even an option. But it wasn't clear to me sort of what the publisher was doing for me so much. Obviously, traditional publishing has some risks to it at this point with regard to not being treated well inside the publication engine, being canceled therein. Our publisher, Penguin Portfolio, has been utterly terrific with us, like really been remarkable in every regard. So, we only have really those two experiences with traditional publishers. And I would say in the first case, St. Martin's, I was treated well. There was just sort of not a lot of help. And here we've been treated so well that at the moment, I feel like don't mess with the thing that's working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I figured out what I forgot.
Excellent.
Okay.
Does this mean I don't owe, or do I still owe?
Oh, you still owe.
Okay.
Definitely.
Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. No, it's good to be clear about it.
Yeah.
All right. Here's the argument.
Mm-hmm.
This is, again, about walking and rhythm and all of that. Neurons transmit information kind of like wires, but they're not like wires in that the information, because it transmits as a result of channels on the surface of the neuron opening and ions flowing in, transmit information way slower than wires, right? So that means that distances that exist in a body are actually meaningful in terms of how long these things take, which makes the process of learning how to do something like walk much harder. Because if what you need is to send an impulse that causes a muscle in your foot to contract, and then you need the feedback that says, did it, right? Then the point is that's a long process. Even in a myelinated neuron system, you're going to have that's too long. So what you need to do is send a message.
Well, and even if it's CNS from the base of the spine, like it doesn't necessarily need to be going all the way up to brain, but it might be, it has to be central nervous system, which means it at least has to get up to your pelvis region.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's put it this way. It's too long a distance to do it as a signal goes and a sensory feedback returns. So what do you do? Well, you have to send a message that you know how it will interact with the muscle, and then you need to track how long it will take before the muscle contracts, right? And so the idea of having a kind of clock-like thing working in the background that says, that message should have just arrived, right? You don't need the feedback to know that it did. That would be an important way of building such a system. And the bigger the creature it is, the more elaborate that system would have to be in order to coordinate what the brain of the creature wants done with the body of the creature, and it's being done. So like a giraffe, for example, can run, right? But the distances in a giraffe are huge.
Yeah.
Right. And so anyway, imagine that it has some kind of rhythm thing in it so they can track these things.
I can imagine there might be, if this is an accurate model, something in here about enhancing the learning of walking in babies and toddlers with appropriately timed syncopated music playing as they are engaged in trying to walk.
Well, I guess what I'm arguing is that you would imagine, if you think about, let's say that you have a sequence of flexes of the leg that need to happen in order to walk, right? But the second one in the sequence has to happen before a feedback from the first one could possibly have returned, right? So you have to send them at the right distance apart in time in order to get the leg to do the thing. And you say, I consciously moved my leg. And the point is, well, you consciously sent a bunch of signals knowing that they would arrive at the right distance apart in order to get the leg to do the thing that it did, right? So that kind of system would then interface obviously with the learning. You would have to learn like how to load in the motions that you sent the information about at the right distance apart. And then eventually you'd get so good at it that you would just, it would take no thought. You would just be like, yeah, run, like the way we do, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And the last thing was going to be, so if you had that system of some sort of clock-like timekeeper in the central nervous system that kept these things the right distance apart, and then you pick up music because music becomes somehow useful for humans, doesn't matter why in this case, then the point is you would expect it to tap into that thing because in many ways it's the same phenomenon, right? Like if you're plucking guitar strings, you may need to send the message to this for the second pluck before the first one has reached your ear, right? That kind of thing.
Good.
But yeah, you still owe.
Yeah, I know. 2 last questions, one of which is just a comment. Please start accepting Bitcoin. PayPal will start cracking down eventually.
So here's the question. Yeah, we would totally be up for accepting Bitcoin, but how do we get that to interface with the system?
I don't know.
But we should think about it. I think we would be thrilled.
We'd love to. And of course, Odyssey accepts
LBRY.
LBRY, yeah, which I think they pronounce library, but yeah, LBRY. So some kind of interface there where, also accepting questions there, maybe something.
So here's the problem. LBRY must be purchasable somehow, but I don't think it's
LBC, by the way.
LBC?
Library currency.
Oh, library currency. Okay.
LBRY is the platform.
So
that's right.
I was looking at Coinbase recently. It's possible that I need to go back and look at LBC, but I think the thing is with Coinbase, which is one of the simplest ways to do crypto, you're limited to the currencies that are frequently traded. Right? You can trade between them, in fact, but the point is you can't just trade any crypto with it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. We have to figure this out. But yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Yep. Final question for today. Could embracing despair help at this time rather than hope? Hope seems impotent. I don't think so. I don't think, I think grief is often adaptive, sadness, moroseness, but despair as the opposite of hope, as a kind of hopelessness, effectively guarantees that you won't escape from whatever it is. And actually, we argue in the book. We give a little story about you're in a boat on a river, and you find that you're being pulled more and more quickly, and that you're near the top of a waterfall you didn't know existed. And you start paddling like hell, even though as you get pulled faster and faster towards that top of that waterfall, over which you will likely plunge, and you have no idea how high it is, and it seems ever more likely that you're going to die. Despairing guarantees your death. Maintaining hope, even as the evidence looks more and more like your hopefulness is somewhat delusional, is the only possible chance you have.
Yeah,
to getting out of the situation. There's
no evolutionary reward for giving up. There are circumstances in which there could be, but the point is, in the case where you don't know that it's hopeless, giving up hope can't possibly solve the problem, and therefore even tiny amounts of hope are enough. But in this point, I would, in reference to this question, I would say, I think it's set up wrong, right? I do think that there's something to be said for looking into the abyss, but in order to get over it, right? You have to look at it and you've got to say, yep, that sucks. And it's going to take you a little time where you look in and you say, that sucks. We shouldn't have gotten here. We shouldn't have allowed it to happen, but we are here. And then at the point that you've just sort of grown accustomed to it, then the point is then you can go back to doing stuff that's useful. And that's what you need. And so I think people spend so much time avoiding looking into the abyss, lying to themselves about it, that they actually end up paralyzed in this sort of, pre-despair state, rather than just, if you think about it this way, all right, so suppose
it could be regarded that you are actually advocating for a stare into the abyss, embrace the despair, but make sure that that's finite.
Absolutely.
But that is a little bit of a different answer than what I gave.
Yeah. No, I really think it's something you don't know unless you've been put through something that causes you to do it or to have no choice but to do it. But the point is something like things are very serious. That could preoccupy you to no useful effect. If hope is effectively lost, then you have license to gamble on things that might work, right? And so the point is there's a liberation, I'm not going to quote the song lyric, but there is a liberation that comes from the recognition that probably there's nothing that's going to successfully address the issue. And frankly, I think people would be mentally healthier if they found themselves there. And ironically, we'd be a lot more likely to solve the problem, because if your point is, yep, I've seen it. I've seen the monster. It seems very dangerous. Let's figure out what our best shot is, and let's take our best shot, because what else are we going to do, right? It's sort of the let's roll kind of thing, right? And I absolutely advocate it, and I think it's healthy. And frankly, I think if you do it, you will end up finding that there are others, and you will join them, and you will feel a lot better about life, right? At least, if it's not going to work, it's not going to work, and you'll at least know who to talk to about it and not feel crazy. And if it is going to work, it's going to be the people who aren't paralyzed by despair, who are going to figure out what to do. So it's sort of the right answer no matter what.
Very good. So that brings us to the end.
Yes. Just the end of the podcast.
I felt like that brought us to the end.
No.
Or did I take the wrong message from that?
No, I think you're still looking into the abyss. Yeah. It's
it's going to be okay. You heard it here first. It's going to be okay.
Perfect. Yes. I'm sure it will in a cosmic sense.
We will be back next week with episode 99 of Dark Horse Livestream. The week after that, what would be episode 100 is actually going to be a break week for us, because 2 of our family are going to be traveling then. So episode 100 will be 1 week later than we are expecting, but we will be back next week with episode 99. Until then, be good to the ones you love, eat good food, and get outside.
Be well, everyone. It's just an abyss.